Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Hopkins, and I am the president and founder of Breaking the Chains Foundation and also a health coach. I am accompanied today chatting with my good friend, Natalie Leon, who is also a body image fitness coach and a BTCF partner. We love working with Natalie. And we are going to do this amazing conversation, Turn Your Struggles into Strengths with a Loving Me Lifestyle, where we'll be chatting with Natalie about her condition of 25 years periodic paralysis, which has turned a lifetime struggle into a lifelong mission through her creation of the Loving Me lifestyle. You know, Natalie, the reason I wanted to have this conversation is you and I talk about this, is that Breaking the Chains really talks about whether it's having an eating disorder, disordered eating, or mental health or wellness concerns, any of those things. It's not what it looks like on the outside. It's what's really going on the inside. And upon these many conversations that you and I have had, I was honestly surprised. It was really surprising for me to learn that you suffered from this silent disease. Because of what you do in your life today, both professionally and personally. And I thought it was really important to share with folks because I really feel like it's going to resonate with them, because no matter what our struggles are, whatever they may be, they can blossom into our greatest strengths. And I also want to let the folks know out there that this is Natalie's first time sharing her story about her periodic paralysis, and that it doesn't need to be silent, and that we really do hope that her story will resonate with those who need to hear it. And there was a quick thought and something that we also talked about prior to that, and I thought this was a great question. So maybe as you're listening to this conversation, it's more about maybe thinking, what is something you struggle with? And how could a wellness lifestyle help you to turn your struggle into a strength? So Natalie, yeah, how are you?
Thank you so much. I'm good. Today is good. And I feel so honored to have this conversation. I think if you would have asked me 25 years ago if I'd be talking on the other side of this, I don't know that I would have said yes, that I would be. So it has become, it has been quite a journey. And so I try to remember and stay very humbled by where I've gone on this journey. And so, yes, if you're listening right now, just understanding that wellness does not have a look, health does not have a look, and we all struggle in different ways. And a lot of times what's going on mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically, we can't really see it in someone else. And that was definitely the case for me. No one really understood, or even doctors could really wrap their head around what is going on with this young 19-year-old girl who I was probably like a freshman, sophomore in college at UCLA. And I was coming down Sunset Beach Boulevard. As you know, Deborah, it's like a windy road. And when I got back home to my apartment, I felt like, this is weird. I can't really move my left arm. And I got out of the car, started walking towards my steps of the apartment, and all of a sudden my right leg went out, and then my left leg just kind of feels like a melting feeling. And then another arm started to kind of collapse. Then I could feel my breathing slow down. My tongue was getting heavy. My eyelids were, and I thought, am I just really tired? We had been studying for finals, and this is important because people that struggle have different triggers. And so for me, we had just been studying for finals. So we were eating, tons of junk food, trying to stay up late, trying to push, caffeine, all the things that now I know better. But we were doing this thinking that it was helping me. And this was the one trigger that set it off that day. And this is normal for people who struggle with a genetic form of this disorder, is that it will come in our teens. And we see that so often when major stressors happen. There's almost this psychosomatic condition that can emerge due to the stress in our lives. And we see that through cancers. We see it through so much. And I saw it in my own life. So anyways, I get home and everything is just not moving. And later that night, I kind of felt like I was coming to, and then I started like jerking, like almost like seizing. So it feels like almost like a contraction of the abdomen. And for years, Deborah, they'd said, well, that's not periodic paralysis. because that was one of the first diagnoses on the table. I started to see doctors across the country. No one could figure out what it was. And they said, well, it's not that. But we know now, because it's such a rare disease, that it is part of periodic paralysis. So again, it's a weakness in your muscles that happens because it's something going on with the chemistry inside your muscles. So the ion channels inside of your muscles. And so for me, again, it was genetic and very scary. And as this is going on, I'm also struggling a lot in the acting world as far as my body image. And so feeling out of control with my body, also feeling like I had to control my body to look a certain way, which led to an eating disorder. And of course, and this may be interesting for our eating disorder audience, is binging. And so I'm restricting as an orthorexic, trying to eat so perfectly according to these diagnoses I was getting, like hypoglycemia. Well, you have to eat every 2 hours. And everything felt so regimented around food. I felt like if I didn't do it perfect, I had this mental depression going on around it. And then having that coupled with everything else going on, it was like restriction would lead to binging, which would lead to more attacks. And it was this vicious cycle. Yeah. And it wasn't until I really started to get a handle on my eating disorder, a handle on what was going on with the paralysis, which honestly, thanks to my mother, who's an incredible woman, she was the one that really said, there's a hormonal connection here. There's a hormone connection. There's a stress connection. I started to really be able to pinpoint what was going on. And that's why this wellness piece, no matter what you're going through, if we can start to look at it as a bigger picture and these 5 aspects that we're going to share in a moment, then we can start to see our wellness lifestyle as, is it helping us or hurting us? The things that we're choosing to.
That is so important. And honestly, it was so I don't mean to say this in a very astounding way, but when you told me this story, it was very fascinating because this was quite a journey for you. There was you were misdiagnosed many times. There were no answers. You were told this is not what you're feeling. And at the same time, you're going through all these multiple other things that are happening to your health that are kind of, jumping on, and you felt like you were in this vicious roller coaster. So the periodic paralysis on one hand, and then the eating disorder, the disordered eating. And then, it kind of brings me, because I wrote down some of these questions we talked about, and I don't want to miss anything. It happened to you as a teenager. And when you went through this, it was how am I going to be able to treat it? What were the outcomes? Or can you share just a little bit of your journey of how you began to treat it before we jump into kind of all of the emotional, mental things that you found later on that became your victory through this all? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that that's important with anyone who's struggling with anything like physical or mental health, even emotional wellness, is there's going to be misdiagnoses along the way. A couple of those were I actually have a medical record where a doctor had said, she's type A personality, probably just stress related. And this was after years of struggling. And then I was in psychiatry and psychology and on different antidepressants, thinking it was depressive. I was in a seizure center for a very long time, trying to figure out if it was seizures. So what also may happen to people is then not only you misdiagnosed, you're mistreated in the sense that I was given medications that were making my condition even worse. So then I had to stop school for a while. Like I said, I was in LA. I moved home for a little bit to finish school with my family because I couldn't even, beta blockers alone were just stopping everything from even functioning. So that led to a lot of anxiety and depression because you just can't function as a normal teenager, much less in my 20s. So I think what started to happen was that my lifestyle that I teach now to my clients it was a necessity. It's not something that I just developed because I thought, oh, how cool. Let me write down a couple of things that are helping. I have to live this lifestyle. And it is a delicate one. But in order to be able to do what I do now, whether it's the coaching, even the fitness aspect of what I'm able to do, it's a miracle. it really is a testimony to this lifestyle.
And I hear you talking, and it's so fun because every time we talk about it, something new comes up. Like and I love that because I'm actually learning more than I even knew before. But for people who don't really know, I mean, you really told me, like, there were times where, getting out of bed, I couldn't get, I have to tell my body, move my finger, move this, do that. And to let folks know that what that's like for you, just kind of, if you can take a moment in this space that you're in when you actually cannot physically move. Can you kind of walk us through that so that we know that where that is coming from, or what steps you needed to make as you got, more treatment, or more things that work for you, or develop the things that work for you that were not even treatment you were being told? I mean, what was that like for you?
Well, so going into an attack with me, what it feels like is, imagine the feeling right before you get up, where you're in between sleep and you're in between wakefulness, and you feel like you're just so heavy, like everything just feels so exhausted. And you feel like, then I don't know, I think I've talked to people where they experience this feeling where they physically can't move, like they just feel this heaviness, but it's literal, like you cannot move. And so what I've had to do is work on this, because when this felt out of control, when I started to say, am I dying? Like, is this, like, what is this? My aunt had multiple sclerosis. Could it be that? Nobody knows what it is. Your heart's doing all these crazy rhythms, and it affects your heart rhythms. So I really had to change my mental state. But let me say, I went through a lot of trials and tribulations before I got there. I was extremely depressed, and clinically depressed, I should say. And it took a lot of these aspects that we'll get into. I want to say that the aspects of hypnotherapy, changing the way I was seeing my attacks, I call them, really changed a lot. And one of the things I realized was that I have the power to change the way I'm looking at this. And so now what I do is, when I'm in these attacks, I go, oh, Natalie's rebooting. And I go, and I just literally scan my body everywhere where I'm feeling that heaviness, and I push in a beautiful color. So I use visualization. I use these things that we're about to talk about. And I guess that's a good segue to really go into.
Yeah, definitely.
These tips.
Because it goes back to, I mean, you were processing a lot. I mean, obviously, and it was on so many different levels with different situations and conditions going on at the same time. And it was tremendous. I mean, let's just say that that's what it was. And so for you to be able to, I mean, when we think about our health, I mean, most of the time we think emotional, physical, and mental, but there's two more aspects I think that you put together. And I'd love to hear, and everybody else to hear, how you processed that and what that was for you.
Okay, so today we're going to cover 5 topics. So these are based on my book, Loving Me, the 5 connections to loving yourself. But I'm going to change it up a little bit today to talk more about how it related to wellness in general. Okay. And that is physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual wellness. All of those aspects together. And in those categories, I have different tips. So I'll start with physical, because honestly, if I didn't fix the physical, I just felt like, where do you start? So
exactly. That is definitely.
I had to really get to what is going on. And some of the different things that help, besides obviously talk therapy, so cognitive behavioral therapy, things like to be able to cope with what I was going through. But the aspects of yoga was a huge thing. And that's what I talk about in my book, of the not just poses, but the lifestyle of it, how we start to really evaluate what's working or not working in our lives. And what we were talking about, the psychosomatic things, like what's going on emotionally that can be triggering these episodes of whatever is going on for you, whether it is depression, anxiety, stress, like what is going on emotionally in my life. And that's what I love to help people unpack, that I always say, weight is a symptom. There's something going on underneath all this. And so yoga was a big thing, and I call it mindful movement. So I teach about 12 different types of fitness, but being able to mindfully move in all of those areas and really understand what that means. Yeah. So no matter, like, I know you and Chris are doing this event this weekend, and being able to really look at, yes, I can push in certain ways, but how am I going to feel? How do I feel before I do that? How do I feel while I'm doing that? How do I feel after? Being able to evaluate how our movement is actually affecting us. And that leads to nutrition. Are we feeding our bodies well? This is interesting. So one of the biggest triggers for me is eating out of balance. So is eating out of balance for me, I should say. So for example, back when I was struggling, it was fat-free. So what do you think I was doing? Tons of high carbs. Well, high carbs is a trigger for my type of periodic paralysis. There's different types. There's some people who have it, they may get triggered if they don't eat enough carbs. They need a higher carb. But for me, I need a balance of proteins, fats, and carbs every single time I sit down to eat. And that's just the way I do it. So knowing what nutrition works for you. Are you hydrated? Do you have enough electrolytes? If you're working out, are you refueling with those electrolytes?
Right.
So kind of having that different relationship with food, where it wasn't just calories, fats, and carbs. It was, how do I actually feel in my body with these foods? So that's where intuitive eating came from. It actually didn't come from recovery with my eating disorder. It came from literally having to learn it, or, your body.
Like you said, it was a necessity. It needed to happen.
So that's where that kind of happened. And then I would also say a really big game changer was acupuncture.
Really? Okay.
Yes, it was.
I'm
so
a fan.
helpful. But I have a really good acupuncturist. So he was amazing. But he helped me get my organs to work so that things could start to move a little bit better. And that was huge, and also helped emotionally as well. But really, the thing that was the shift, I talked about hypnotherapy, or even going into like mindset, and that moves us into mental, is I had to change how I saw the situation. And this also goes to changing how I saw myself in it. In other words, I didn't want to let it define me anymore. I felt like I was walking around like I'm a sick person.
And it's like an eating disorder too, not allowing it to define you. Right.
Yeah, not letting it define me. And so I had to really change the way I was talking about myself. And I use words like, I'm surviving this, I'm overcoming this. And I still to this day speak that way. And one of the ways I do that is I journal a lot. And so in my book, you'll see a journal, but I journal the two sides of what's going on inside of me if I start to struggle. And there's something so powerful about putting it on paper, getting it out of your head, and then challenging that negativity. Because I always say, instead of strengthening the struggle, which is what we're doing when we stay in our head about it, why not use self-care to find strength in the struggle?
I love that.
And so that was a really powerful thing, is to be able to journal it. And that leads us to emotions and being able to say, it's okay, I'm not okay right now. And I don't think that was a message that really, when I started talking about self-love or anything that we're talking about together with body inclusivity, positivity, like all these things were not talked about back then, really. They just weren't.
No,
it was 25 years ago.
Yes, definitely.
And
none of it.
No, and the messages are, thank God, they're being shared now, but they just weren't back then. And so the mental health wasn't really talked about either. So the emotional wellness is a very big piece. And that goes to things like, I plan ahead. I know exactly when my weeks are that are going to be more challenging for me, but it's taken me a long time to figure this out, many, many years, to find a pattern. And I know those are the weeks that I'm a little bit more gentle with myself. Those are the weeks I find compassion. Those are the weeks that I allow breaks. Next week, I'm taking time off for my birthday week to restore, recharge, because I know I'm doing a lot right now. And I know that I need those breaks. So are you giving yourself permission to pause? And when I pause, I do things like I watch funny movies and I read inspiring books. I really pay attention to aspects of wellness, Deborah, that are about what I'm putting into my body. And I don't mean just food and drinks and stuff. And that leads, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Being mindful, like, what are you watching? What are you exposing yourself to? Has been huge, especially this last few years, and to really being mindful about that. And that leads to social. And this is one of the a delicate part to share, but I think it's important, is to not isolate yourself. I know when you're struggling, it was so easy to just put the covers over my head, say, I'm never going to get over this, lock my door, and just hide and cry. And that's important. It's important to find that time to feel our feelings. And it's also important to find times to allow other people to help us. I know with a lot of my clients, they struggle with this piece too. It's like they feel guilty for allowing other people to help. So I will share this quick story about my daughter. When she was 2, she learned, and this is many years ago, she learned at that age how to take care of mom when her body goes to sleep. And she does. And so she would get a little blanket, turn off the lights, make it quiet, call, like I had FaceTime for my family so she could call my husband or my mother. And then she'd go, mommy's body's sleeping. And they'd come right up, so I had systems in place that I had. And I remember feeling so guilty. Like my poor daughter has to have a mom that's sick. So you can see how that mindset can start to really eat at you.
Yeah.
And then I shifted it to look at now years later, the compassionate, amazing, loving young woman.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're giving people an opportunity to serve when we need help. It's not that we should feel guilty for it. And that I had to learn that the hard way. That's still kind of hard.
That's a beautiful story to share, like on so many levels. And actually, I don't know if I've ever heard you tell me that story before. So thank you.
Probably not. Yeah. Another note on that social wellness is pets. I had a dog she was a rescue animal. She was not a rescue animal. Sorry. She was a rescue animal, but not a service dog. That's what I'm trying to say. And she would come up to me and put her paws on me. And I would know by the way she was putting her claws on my leg that I was about to have my attack. And so I would sit down and she would lay with me while my attacks would pass. So don't isolate yourself, whether that's pets, people, ask for help. That's a big one.
I don't mean to, did you finish? Because I'm so excited just to even say this piece. If you didn't finish, go on. But I just want to quickly, I am so happy you talked about the social aspect of it. And it ties into the emotional, all of it so much. And goes back to kind of what you and I were saying is we didn't talk about that stuff, any silent disease kind of just hung silent, just stayed silent. And so the idea of not isolating yourself and talking about social and giving an example to that, wow, that really, I was going to start crying, Natalie. I still might. That was really powerful. So thank you for sharing that. That actually really resonated with me. Put me back a few years thinking about some things myself. So I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there anything else you wanted to add to those 5 pillars or?
Yes. The last one is spiritual. So the 5th pillar is spiritual. And I would share, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's funny because, well, not, well, yeah, you do. We kind of briefly tapped on that. It was, for us or for anyone, spiritual means something different for everyone. And I think that for some people, it may mean one thing. For some other people, it may mean another thing, but it doesn't mean that it's not part of this, process that brings it together. And I know it's very important for you because the yoga, correct? And what that did for you. And yeah.
And so before I even get out of bed in the morning, before I even open my eyes, I take that quiet time. And that is my spiritual time. That's when I fill in. That's when I'm meditating. That's when I'm praying. That's when I'm connecting to who I am that day. And asking for strength and asking for who am I here to serve? Because when we get out of ourselves, I think the most dangerous place to be is when we are struggling with something and we stay so myopic and we are just here in our own struggle and we don't see what else is going on. And luckily I had a business to run and I had a family to take care of, and that got me out of bed. And to this day, sometimes it still gets me out of bed. And then I find myself finding joy in the little things and finding gratitude in the things I can do and finding grace for the things that I can't. And so that has been a very big thing, to find something outside of yourself. When I was struggling, it was walking dogs at the local shelter that lifted me up. So no matter what you're going through, finding the little things that bring a little glimpse of hope, a little glimpse of joy, and that moves the spirit.
Yeah, and I love the idea that when we do, like you talked the story about your daughter, and what you're saying right now is that knowing that we can be of service and stepping outside of ourselves, or knowing that others enjoy being in service of us to serve, it really does take us out of our mind space and kind of opens us up to a much bigger world than, we sometimes, or have, that isolation piece. It takes us away from that, which I think is a really powerful use of our time and energy. But it does take time, and it's not something that may come easy, but it's worth it, right?
It is. And just even getting outside in nature and just getting outside of your head,
Yes. Right. And like Krista, when you mentioned Krista, our board member, the other day, she just says it has to do with other factors. And she just said, sunlight can change. And, those, right. It can change it all. Gosh, I don't want to miss anything. Cause we've been wanting to do this for months. Let's see. So the 3 things that helped you, if you could boil it down. I mean, I know we talked about, 2 things. Okay. So how you recovered, you talked a lot about that, the healing process. I know that there's continual maintenance you still have to do with yourself concerning your periodic paralysis. Do you want to talk about that and the 3 things that really help you?
I would say it's practicing this lifestyle on a continual basis. I talk about the ABCs of loving me. So I'll give the top 3. And the A is awareness and acceptance. So every day I am aware of where I'm at, how I'm feeling, I'm checking in, and then I'm accepting that that's where I am today. And sometimes it's going to be better than others. And just that acceptance is huge. The B is breathing, just being able to breathe and be here now, whatever that looks like. I do a lot of breath work to help keep grounded. And the C is compassion, because I find that the more compassionate I am with myself, the more compassionate I can be with everyone else around me. And so I'd say those are the top 3 things that I practice daily within the Loving Me lifestyle. I almost laugh to call it that, because it literally, it's just the way I live, is all of these things. But it's developed into its own thing. And there's so many more tips, but I just feel like that's a good starting point.
Yeah, definitely. And oh gosh, Natalie, we talked about so many things.
Yeah.
I guess 2 things we could talk about yet, just kind of bringing us back around. And the idea that we just want to remind folks that obviously Natalie's talked about that, when we are striving for our own wellness, and it's a balance, it's a daily thing, that you can see that sometimes our struggles do become our strengths. And it was really important to hear your story, and that you're and when you ask the questions like, when did it become a lifestyle for you? And I think you said because it was a necessity. And I thought that was really powerful. And I just kind of wanted to highlight that a second. And then the last, I don't know, can I ask you a couple more questions? Okay. Is there anything that you want to share with us right now that you're doing? I know you've got your book and you're teaching, but just for people who don't know. Yeah.
Yes. So I always have private virtual coaching and support that I offer. Group coaching. I do a lot of speaking engagements on different topics that have to do with wellness, fitness, body image, etc., and sharing this story as well. And then, of course, working with Breaking the Chains Foundation, raising awareness, and working with
love working with Natalie.
Yay! And then working with Lululemon to bring more awareness around body inclusivity. So a lot of fun stuff coming up there. So and I have retreats coming up next week or next month. I'm so excited. So that's where we get away on the beach for a few days. You need to come at one of those. So
I'm going to.
Yeah. Yes. So there's always something that's moving inside of this Loving Me world that I call it. But I think more than anything, it's just staying true to myself and my message and what I know has helped me, and hopes that it helps someone else.
Definitely. And if there was one thought you could share, like with us today, as we kind of say our goodbye for this conversation, what would that be?
I would say to trust your journey. I would say that this quote that I love, that I talk about all the time, is one day you're going to tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will become someone else's survival guide.
Mm.
And at first you're like, that sounds so intense, but it's so true. We all go through something. And if and when we choose to share it, because it is a choice to share it, you never know who you can help.
So true. So true. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you
We
so
have been planning this for a couple months now, maybe even longer. I know that it takes a lot sometimes to share something that's so deep and real and true that you've struggled with, and it being your first time, you really did well. And I really, really am honored that you shared it with Breaking the Chains. And I know that you're going to tell this story more, and I know you're going to share this story more. And I know that it's going to help those who need to hear it. So I just really want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for holding this space, not just for me, but for so many people that have something to share. I think this is where we start, is having this
Thank
conversation.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. I will see you soon or talk to you soon. Okay.
Bye.